Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 24 years of law enforcement analysis experience, most of which with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In 2025, he was awarded the King Charles III Coronation Medal. He is recognized as an expert in cellular communications analysis. He is fluent in 4-ish languages, and he's currently the director of intelligence consulting and training. Please welcome Robert Aboumitri. Robert, how are we doing?
Great. How are you? I'm doing well. I'm doing very well.
All right. There's a lot to go over today. You have such a interesting and fascinating history that you've carved out, and you're recently retired. That's one thing I forgot to mention in your introduction. And so I recently had David Grabelski on, and he says he's on his second retirement. He said the first one he didn't do so well because in his first retirement, he was just as busy in his first retirement as he was in his career. So I don't know if you feel the same way, if you're truly retired or still just as busy.
I'm retired really to collect my retirement pension, but I'm actually still working. I do a lot of consultancy work, and I continue to do a lot of research on my own and write articles. So I'm not really retired. Once you're in it, you're always in it. You're always doing collecting, analyzing, and talking about stuff. So I'm still in full work mode while retired from the RCMP.
Nice. All right. So how did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
To be honest with you, I did not set out to become an analyst initially. September 11th happened, so I actually decided, let me do something with my language skills initially. I saw a job for the RCMP as a database manager, or the job really was to migrate information from the RCMP's intelligence database to a national intelligence database that was mandated after September 11th for all police agencies, all 350 agencies in Canada, to basically have their information in one single repository. While I was there, I must have exhibited some analytical skills because my background, I came from project management in marketing research. And if you actually look at both functions, the process is the same, but the end result or the focus is different. So the officer in charge of intelligence said to me, you would make a very good analyst, because the reports I was giving him updating the progress of the migration of the information were very analytical. Job became available in Windsor, Ontario, with the Integrated Border Enforcement Team, which was also a newly created team as a result of September 11th to collaborate with our American counterparts on border issues. So it was with the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Border Patrol, ICE, HSI, the Ontario Provincial Police, the RCMP, as well as the Windsor Local Police. I was successful, and my first assignment was fascinating. I found myself surrounded with data, maps, investigators asking questions. What does this tell us? So I discovered that you could shape major operations without ever putting on a vest or making an arrest. And I loved it. So I've always liked patterns and simplifying complex things. And this is essentially what our job is. Once I saw that one of my analytical products changed the direction of an investigation and even I had a product that impacted legislation in Parliament, I knew that this was where I could add the most value.
So, as I mentioned in your intro, you speak 4-ish languages.
Yes.
And did you, prior to you becoming an analyst, prior to 9/11, had you already established speaking these languages?
Yeah. I spoke Arabic to begin with. I actually speak, read, and write Arabic. As a matter of fact, I'm a certified translator for evidence within the RCMP. And that also landed on me by mistake, because one of our officers was in court and he was asked by the defense lawyer if he was a certified translator, and he said no. And the lawyer basically said, what assurance do I have that what you translated is correct? So they set out to certify somebody from within, and I was certified. But I also did all my studies, my primary and high school education in French, my university in English. I spent some time in Italy and I learned Italian, and basically Arabic. I spoke it all my life. So yeah, it was fantastic because when I first, during the early days after September 11th, I was receiving messages from California all the way to the Yukon. They see some graffiti on some wall, they take a picture of it and send it to me. And what does this mean? The people that spoke Arabic at the time were few and far between.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's Spanish, the one that makes it the four-ish, right? It's a little
Actually,
rusty
no,
on the Spanish.
Spanish is the five-ish.
Yeah,
So
five-ish.
English, French, Italian, Arabic, and Spanish.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I would think that during the time that you're coming about with 9/11, coming on board to the analyst position, I mean, that obviously paid dividends knowing all those languages. And I know you do a lot of teaching, and we're going to talk a little bit about education. But while we're on the subject, I'm curious what you're seeing out there in terms of analysts knowing at least a second language, let alone like four or five different languages.
On the education part, when I first joined as an analyst, the emphasis was on the ability to write English. I think things have changed completely since. Writing English is important, but what's more important is being able to understand cultural perspectives, because we live in societies that are mixed from various cultures, but also being very technical is absolutely key, because the job of an analyst is becoming a lot more technical than literary.
Yeah.
So knowing an extra language in terms of spoken language, and also knowing an extra language in terms of scripting language is necessary.
Yeah. And you came into this not only with the different languages, as we just mentioned, but you also come in with a marketing research background as well.
Yes.
And I'm always curious, like what people did before they were analysts that helped them be a great analyst. So can you talk about how that marketing experience helped you?
Yeah, I was a project manager with a marketing research company where we had kind of brainstorming sessions to help a client. The client comes to us with, I'd like to understand better the market that's out there and who's buying my product and who's not buying my product. I recall one of the projects was Gatorade. And so we would design questionnaires to include, for example, the individual's income bracket, the individual's sex, the individual's where they live, the general area, how many family members, a lot of attributes to these individuals. And we would send out teams to various supermarkets and give people a small thank you for their answers. And they would bring it back, input that information into the software like SPSS, and we would do cross tabulation and find out who buys the product, who doesn't buy the product, where are they from, are they male, are they female, are they rich, are they poor, where do they live, which areas, what other products do they buy, and recommend to the client. I mean, if you think about it, it is the intelligence cycle. At the time, though, I didn't know about the intelligence cycle, but it is planning, it is collection, it is evaluation, it is collation, it is analysis, and it is dissemination to the client with recommendations at the end. And then when I fell upon a career in criminal intelligence analysis, it was an easy transition for me because I had the skills and I applied them for a different purpose, a more, I think, valid and important purpose, I think. But that's how I became an intelligence analyst. It was uncanny, the resemblance of the work that I did in the private sector before joining the police.
Yeah. So when do you start with the phone analysis in your career?
Yeah, so phone analysis, because we had a lot of cross-border crime, We were collecting a lot of called detailed records from the bad guys. And at the time, cell site analysis was not a thing. I received data, I remember, by mistake with cell site data, and I was fascinated. And I was fascinated because I have these codes. So I picked up the phone and called the service provider, asking them, what are these codes? Oh, these codes belong to our cell sites. I'm like, okay, but do you have locations for these cell sites? Yeah, they said, we have a database. So I requested it. They said, no, it has to be done via a production order or a warrant. So I requested our guys to do a production order for the coordinates of the cell sites, and they did. And it was a fascinating thing because my counterparts did a subpoena on who we thought on the US side was somebody who was working with the smugglers on the Canadian side. And when I did the mapping, it was amazing how I could see the smuggler on our side move from the city of Toronto all the way to near Sarnia on our side, or Port Huron on the US side in Michigan. And the guy who was receiving the product, because they were smuggling across the river, was also moving from the city of Detroit all the way up to Port Huron. And then it became a thing to use CDR analysis and the temporal and spatial components of that analysis in the work that we do. Yeah, and then I started to develop methodologies to make sense of that information. I have to admit that at the time, we didn't have a lot of expensive software and tools. The tool that I would use the most for this was Excel. And to be honest, it was more than sufficient because it allowed me to import the data, clean it up, do some normalization of the data, and then create additional data sets or additional fields to query the data. I often say that investigators interrogate people, but analysts interrogate data. And I have to admit that I've become a very good interrogator of data because there's a narrative within every data set. And I've been fortunately capable of extracting a lot of narratives from these data sets over my career.
Yeah. And so this is around the time period, like this is like the middle of the aughts, right? So this is like 2005-ish time period.
Yes, 2000, 2003, 2004, 2005. Yeah. For a period of 5-6 years, I was doing this. In 2007, I got a call from a line officer asking me if I spoke French. I said, absolutely, I do. He said, we're sending you to Lebanon. I said, what do you mean you're sending me to Lebanon? He's like, yeah, we're sending you to Lebanon. And so that's when I was involved in probably the biggest case of my career, my 24-year career, which was with the United Nations Independent Investigative Commission, UNTITC, in Lebanon, investigating the assassination of the ex-prime minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri.
And just for our listeners, just real quick, I just want to bring the listeners up to speed. This is Rob's one of two analyst badge stories. And for the listeners, if you're new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career-defining case or project that an analyst works. So sorry, Rob, just sorry to cut you off there, but I wanted the folks at home to know that this was your analyst badge story.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of the many badge stories that I could offer, but this is the top one in my career. Yeah, it's a defining chapter was my work with the United Nations, with the UN International Independent Investigation Commission and the Special Tribunal for Lebanon in The Hague. So the UNTITC was the investigative portion, and the Special Tribunal for Lebanon in Holland in The Hague was the tribunal portion. So the body I was working with went from an investigative body to a prosecutional body. So I led the communications analysis team, and at the time we were working with billions. If I recall correctly, by the time I left, we had about 46 billion rows of data. And so classic link charts were not enough. Yes. So my team and I introduced what we later called co-location analysis. In plain language, we looked at which phones consistently moved together in time and space, and we expected relationships went. We were able to identify other devices that were moving with devices that consistently moved with the prime minister. So there were some devices that were consistently moving with the prime minister for about 4 months. And the moment he was eliminated, the moment he was blown up, these devices disappeared off the network, which told us that these devices are suspect. So we started to look into these devices, and we put forth a hypothesis that if these devices who assassinated the prime minister and were used in a disciplined fashion to only speak with each other and keep an eye on the prime minister until they assassinated him, there must have been other devices to communicate with the chain of command if these guys belonged to a group, or other devices to communicate with their families openly. And we were able to create an algorithm that identified other devices in terms of close spatial and temporal proximity. And then we would profile these devices. And sometimes we find that they're part of a network themselves, and other times they're openly used. And we were able to attribute the devices that were used to assassinate the prime minister to individuals. And as a result, 5 members of Hezbollah were indicted at the end. So, yeah, it was a lot of work, a lot of creative and pioneering work.
Yeah. So back to the 46 billion rows of data. So you mentioned in the prep call yesterday, if I heard you correctly, that was every call in Lebanon over a 5-year period? That's what that 46 billion represented?
It was every single telephonic transaction in Lebanon for 5 years, which included landlines, mobile devices, calling cards, and public phone records. Every single transaction. So, and that came with who called who, what time, for how long, and which cell site they used for these calls. So you could only imagine the type of analysis you could do with that. It was a complete data set. It's a social network analyst dream data set type, because it's a complete set.
Because, and now would that include texting as well? I know texting wasn't super popular as it is now in 2008, but it was still around.
It would include testing, and at times it would include the content of the texting as well.
Wow.
Yeah, because back then they did not treat texting as content. They thought of it as data.
Yeah.
Right. So it was retained.
So what database did you keep this number of records in?
Well, we had a SQL database team that basically uploaded that information on a monthly basis into a SQL database, because I would serve a warrant on the service provider monthly. I have 3 sources of information, a couple of the mobile companies and the Ministry of Telecommunications, and we would put it in a database. So I was in charge of not only an analytical team, and the analysts that were with me came from different countries. I had analysts from Australia, from Japan, from France, from England, from Sweden, which cross-pollinated my knowledge and made me that much better of an analyst. So I credit this investigation of amplifying my abilities. And when I came back to Canada, I found myself to be a lot better than when I left. And then upon my return, that's when my second bad story begins.
Yeah. And I definitely want to get to that. In terms of the working with the team with analysts from different countries, was that necessary, or is that just something where all these countries wanted to supply assistance to try to figure out who did the assassination?
So it wasn't necessary. This was a UN entity, and if it's a UN entity, there are quotas that they need to have representing different countries. It's not that they cannot go to one country and say, give us all the investigators and analysts, because then people would start complaining there's bias, there's influence of one country over the other. So they recruit from various countries. Like the analysts from England, for example, were principal analysts in their own police forces, and they came to the UN because It's more exciting. It's outside their country. It's in The Hague or in Beirut, and it pays a lot more. I had analysts from 3 different agencies in Australia, for example. I had analysts from the Swedish police who were very good at coding, for example, which was the key to the work that we were doing because we were creating our own code, our own bespoke little software solutions, because it's impossible for a human being to go through 46 billion rows of data without any computer assistance. As a matter of fact, to upload the information, we used to farm computers at night when nobody was using the computers. We would run the computers like a farm to upload the data. We had 60, 70 computers that were not being used. We used them to upload data until the morning. It was a very well-oiled operation.
Wow. So you might not know this, but did the data just get purged after the investigation?
It is my understanding that it did get purged.
It just makes me wonder. I was like, man, I wonder how many other crimes you could have solved in that 5-year period, knowing with that whole complete data set.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could have solved a lot of crimes. As a matter of fact, because of it was obtained for that one purpose, we used it for that one purpose. But I'm sure if you ask about a specific criminal activity that occurred and there's a suspect, we could dive into that data and tell you if that suspect, the timeline of the suspect is consistent with the timeline of the victim, and if they ever met, and if there was any communication between them, or even if there is any kind of linkages in terms of geography if there's no communication. We had IMEI data, we had MZ data, we had cell site data, we had all kinds of data. So if you want to verify a resume of somebody having kind of worked at a certain location for 4 or 5 years, you could very easily go and look at the cell sites that he was activating Monday to Friday between 9 and 5 to see if it's true that he was actually working at that office.
This is Dr. Eliane Carr from the Ellensburg Police Department, here to talk about the first of its kind, the Crime Analyst Census Survey. This is an opportunity for crime analysts from around the world to be able to share information on the demographics that make up the field, be able to look at the relationship between commission, non-commission, and how we navigate that relationships in our career field, and also to look at training opportunities and development that will help us foster the opportunities for growth and development, both personally and professionally. If you're interested in taking the survey, you're welcome to go to the link in the show notes below. Ensure that your voice is heard and included in the data.
Andrew, I do want to start right there with the book. What pushed you to write this book, Large Language Models for Mortals?
I was really not happy with the introductory materials for Python. And so I initially wrote that book, Data Science for Crime Analysis with Python. And it's a similar sort of origin story for the large language models.
Well, how can people contact you if they have further questions, and how can they get the book?
Yeah, so the book is available on my website. My website is crime-coder.com. If you go to my website, I have a store to be able to purchase the book either in EPUB or paperback versions worldwide, so you can buy it and get it. For folks listening, I did create a promo code. You can use LEAP LLM, so LEAP LLM, to get $20 off of the paperback. I know from the prior Python book, a lot of folks like the paperback version. And I'll send you the EPUB as well if you use that code. And then to just contact me, I have a contact page right on the site, but you could also just send an email to andrew.wheeler@crime-coder.com.
Well, let's move on to your second badge story then, because as you mentioned that you come back to the office with kind of a new perspective and some new ideas that you want to implement.
Yeah, I came back and I realized that the work that we are doing is not as advanced as the work that I've actually been involved in. And I decided that it's time to start kind of lobbying the decision makers within my police force to start creating some specialization within analysis. I mean, I believe that being a generalist as an analyst is a specialization. to be a specialist and being a generalist, but there's a need for people to say specialize in data analysis, in particular like CDRs called detailed records. So I basically was lobbying to create what I called at the time the communications data analysis team. And communications data is not restricted to just called detailed records. It could be email logs, it could be IP logs, it could be network logs, it could be logs, access logs to a building. It could be any modern day data that we are dealing with, like a smart toaster, a smart fridge, a smart bell, a smart water meter, a smart Fitbit.
Yeah.
All these, I call them digital witnesses. All these digital witnesses are a lot better than human witnesses because they don't lie, they don't think they saw something, they don't pretend, and they don't forget. And they retain information forever because humans over time start to forget.
Yeah.
So I started to lobby our senior managers to create a specialized team. It was new, and policing they have the tendency to resist change. I often say in my lectures that we should call 911 and rescue ourselves from the 1990s. We're stuck in a different era where we live in the golden age of information, yet we don't pay attention to information as much as we should. So I was asked to do a pilot, pick an analyst to do that pilot with. I picked an analyst who actually could do a lot of good coding. And within a year, we proved that we could enhance and optimize surveillance, maximize the results of surveillance while minimizing the deployment of resources and time. By looking at temporal and spatial components of any data, we could provide recommendations to a surveillance team. For example, when is the optimal time to do surveillance and the optimal location to do surveillance? Surveillance is very expensive. You have multiple teams being paid a lot of money, a lot of overtime. And if they sit on a guy randomly without knowing if he's active or not, it could cost a lot of money. But we could even provide good cover stories for undercover operations. We could do a lot of stuff with the work that we do. We were involved in a BlackBerry project where we saved the police force a lot of money and a lot of resources. So when I presented the results, the commanding officer asked me, so how many resources do you want? I said 5 people and some money for some software. And I was given everything I asked for. And the communications data analysis team was created within the RCMP, and that team was a specialized team in structured data. We were looking at modern day data. We were looking at how can we solve a crime using data that we could extract from Bluetooth in a car, from a router, from the telemetrics of a vehicle, from, as I said, I often say, had Jeffrey Dahmer been living in this day and age, his fridge would have called the police on him. Because we have smart fridges that actually look within and see what's in there and what's missing and recommend for you to purchase something. So we live in an era where there is massive data being created by everyone, and that data could solve a lot of crime. My team is still there. We have created methodologies. We have solved a lot of crimes with just something as simple as, oh, we have this MAC address. What can we do with that? And we would tell them exactly how we could get from a MAC address to an individual. We built tools. We wrote standard operating procedures. We created a course, delivered it through the Canadian Police College, and we went on the road with the course all over Canada, and at times the US as well. Over time, we trained thousands of analysts across Canada and abroad. As a matter of fact, I did a lot of training in different countries abroad while I was deployed during the last 4 years. So it was quite rare for an analyst to be involved in something like that and travel the world and teach. And during that time, I was qualified as an expert witness in communications data analysis in 2 different provinces within Canada. That's the equivalent of 2 states in the US. In Nova Scotia, I was declared an expert in the analysis of what's called detailed records when it comes to communication between individuals as well as movement and communication with cell sites. In Ontario, I was qualified as an expert in the analysis of geospatial data, more specific to Google timeline data.
with your expertise, and maybe I jumped ahead a little bit, that you have the data portion of it, that you can talk about the data when you testify. But then there's the aspect of giving your opinion, like
Yes.
what you think you were doing. I would imagine that in terms of cross-examination, there's usually not much the defense attorney is going to try to get you on in terms of the data, because the data is the data. But it would be the opinion piece that they
Yes.
would focus on.
So, I mean, in testimony in court, for us, there's a factual witness and an expert witness. A factual witness is a witness that tells you what the data told him through the analysis. An expert witness gives opinion about what was happening, what was likely happening with the data. For example, I could say that the victim here seems to have turned off his location data because he wants to hide where he's at. However, he took a picture or he used an app that used GPS and placed them in this location. Or I would establish a baseline of behavior and show that during that week when the crime occurred, the behavior was not consistent with the normal behavior. And my opinion would count in court and would be taken into consideration by the judge. So, it's in terms of the defense being able to come after me. If I was a consultant with the defense, I probably would give them a lot of ideas on questions that they could ask, and they could make the analyst very uncomfortable on the stand. It's not something that I've been involved in.
Well,
if I'm paid enough. I can't tell you if I won't do it if I'm paid enough, but
I was gonna say that there might be a pay raise in there, depending on the client, right?
Yes, I have been involved in a case where the defense had a radio frequency professor from a university here in Canada as a consultant on the team. And they actually made one of the engineers from one of the service providers who was on the stand very uncomfortable, to the point where their voice was kind of crackling. So it's to begin with, it's not the most pleasant experience to be on the stand, but if you know your stuff, and most of the time the defense lawyers and the prosecution, as well as the judge and the jury, don't know about the subject as much as you do. So
So you mentioned just to finish up this story, because there is a lot here. We're gonna only spend so much time on this, but you were talking yesterday in the prep call about there was a point where like 60 officers had to read through conversations, had to read through data, and that you were able to come up with a process to simplify those tasks.
Yeah, at the time, BlackBerry was all the rage, early days, before iPhones and Samsungs became the main devices. BlackBerry was the original smartphone. And pin-to-pin technology was being used by business people, by criminals, by average citizens. And anytime a law enforcement agency from across the globe did serve the warrant on BlackBerry, the RCMP had to actually make that happen, because we could enforce that warrant with BlackBerry. And the information would come to us. And then we have to actually look through it, because if the warrant covers 1 year and they give us 2 years, we can't give that to the individual who sent the warrant. Or if there's privileged information, say a conversation with the lawyer, we need to eliminate that from the content. So our officers were actually opening the messages one by one and looking at them, and they were not chronologically ordered. They were zipped individually, and they were in HTML format. So what myself and my team did, we created a script to unzip that information and organize it so that it could be tabulated and sorted chronologically and even filtered for conversations. And that was a job that was being done by 50, 60 individuals. And when you do something like that, you save the money that you were paying for these individuals to do this and reallocate the money to do something else. Which was a force multiplier to be able to create that capacity. And that's been kind of what my team has done over the years, is create and the ability to do something a lot faster than it could be done. You could see it as we're the early AI of law enforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about two aspects in law enforcement analysis to get your take on. One is managing analysts, and the other one is data challenges. I actually want to stick with the data challenges first, if that's okay. Get your opinion and perspective on data challenges with analysts, and then I want to talk about managing analysts.
I think that our main problem today is not lack of data, it's too much data. And data with uneven quality. We might have multiple systems, multiple formats, poor documentation, how the data was created. If you go straight to dashboarding or even using AI today without understanding the context, you risk producing very wrong answers. And I give three characteristics to today's data, which is known out there in the data world. Data is coming at us in large volumes. I call it the triple V, the volume, the variety, and the velocity. We are creating data. You and I are creating tons of data here, gigabytes of data as we're talking. We're using these devices that we call them phones because traditionally they were called phones, but it's not a phone. It's a device, it's a computer that is more powerful than most computers back in the 2000s. And even 5 years ago, we had laptops that were less powerful than the devices we carry with us that we call phones. And we are leaving crumbs behind at every stage of our activity. So the volume of the data that we can potentially receive, the different formats, that it comes in, and the speed with which it comes at us makes it problematic. I believe that we live in probably the age where the most data is being created, which is great for analysis, but also it poses another problem. How can you handle all that data, and how could you normalize that data and prep it for analysis? Because the data is not being collected for analysis, it's being collected for many other reasons, but not for analysis. You could give your accountant a whole lot of data. He's not going to trust it. He's going to have to actually look at it and make sure there's no duplication, there's information that does not belong in there, that belongs to somebody else. So these are issues that we face today. And if we don't have clear standard operating procedures, but also good tools to help us deal with those volumes. And I could see AI that is air gapped, that is not connected to the internet. I could see that as a good resource to sift through data and provide the analyst with the information that the analyst needs to look at.
Speaking of AI, I did read your article that you posted on LinkedIn on AI.
Yes.
For the listeners, I will put it in the show notes, but I do want to take this opportunity to ask about your golden rule because I really like it.
Yeah. You might want to mention it to everybody. I have many golden rules. I think the one that I mentioned in the article was that the AI is not the analyst. You are the analyst. And ultimately it's the analyst who actually decides on the data, and the analyst is the one who actually draws the conclusions.
Yeah. I highly recommend for the listeners the article because I like also in this article how you use AI and IA to differentiate. That was well done.
Yeah. I'm trying to kind of delve into the journalistic world. So I just wanted catchy titles and catchy initial phrases. So artificial intelligence analyst. So I'm like, okay, there's AI, there's IA. I could use that.
I like your 3 V's here, and I'm just thinking about during my time in the early aughts, it was definitely variety that just slowed us down. But there was just so much less data back then. I mean, but the variety of just cleaning data and having it be in different formats and different columns and just being different really bogged us down. But
yes.
Today, with just the amount of data that's out there, I do think there's a lot being left on the table because there's just so much data, and police departments are just not even bothering to try to look for some of this data, all the breadcrumbs that you talked about.
I think one of the major problems with police agencies and law enforcement in general is that we created technology to import data, but we did not create good capacity to extract that data and make sense of it. There's a lot of data out there, but the problem is how can we find it? And I truly believe that AI could be the solution to that. And you could transition from file folder or tombstone type of data to data lakes and data oceans where AI could actually sift through that data and highlight things for you to actually look at and make a final determination about. I mean, we used to spend 70-80% of our time collating the information, extracting phone numbers, extracting license plates, extracting user IDs from unstructured, from text data, from text information. And now that could be done by a machine. And then all you have to do is verify and make sure that it's well sourced.
Yeah. There's a lot of potential there. And I think you mentioned that there's 350 police departments in Canada, which I'm envious of because there's 17,000 here in the States.
Yes.
And just so you get just a variety of budgets and technologies at the police department and what they're going to focus on. And I always find it amazing because you pick any police department in a major U.S. city, they'll be really advanced in one technology, but then they'll be like very outdated in another aspect of the police department. There's very few that are up to speed on a lot of different aspects of policing.
Absolutely. And modern day technology is very expensive as well. And there's always a shortage of funds within a lot of police departments. And policing is not cheap. It's quite expensive. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Within analysis, I think we could also enhance our abilities by recruiting the right people and going after the certain set of skills, and which is, I believe that analysts of the future should kind of study certain things that were not being studied by analysts in my days.
This is Dr. Ellen Carr from the Ellensburg Police Department, here to talk about the first of its kind, the Crime Analyst Census Survey. This is an opportunity for crime analysts from around the world to be able to share information on the demographics that make up the field, be able to look at the relationship between commission, non-commission, and how we navigate that relationships in our career field, and also to look at training opportunities and development that will help us foster the opportunities for growth and development, both personally and professionally. If you're interested in taking the survey, you're welcome to go to the link in the show notes below. Ensure that your voice is heard and included in the data.
Andrew, I do want to start right there with the book. What pushed you to write this book, Large Language Models for Mortals?
I was really not happy with the introductory materials for Python. And so I initially wrote that book, Data Science for Crime Analysis with Python. And it's a similar sort of origin story for the large language models.
Well, how can people contact you if they have further questions, and how can they get the book?
Yeah, so the book is available on my website. My website is crime-coder.com. If you go to my website, I have a store to be able to purchase the book either in EPUB or paperback versions worldwide, so you can buy it and get it. For folks listening, I did create a promo code. You can use LEAP LLM, so LEAP LLM, to get $20 off of the paperback. I know from the prior Python book, a lot of folks like the paperback version. And I'll send you the EPUB as well if you use that code. And then to just contact me, I have a contact page right on the site, but you could also just send an email to andrew.wheeler@crime-coder.com.
Let's move on to you managing analysts, because I think that's an important topic that we've covered on this podcast. So I do want to get your perspective. You talked about your success stories about managing the unit or even the temporary units, But just kind of go into some of the challenges that you faced while a manager and some of the workarounds that you were able to accomplish.
Yeah, stepping into management, I learned very quickly that the job is not to be the best analyst in the room, because it's no longer about analysis when you're a manager. It's more about creating the best environment for analysts to thrive. So providing them with the resources that they need, whether it be technology, tools, or even the training that they need. Analysts need time to explore and test ideas. Investigators need products by specific dates and deadlines. So you have to set a clear priorities and define what's good enough to be a product that can be disseminated while protect their ability to think and produce. Another challenge for a manager is really matching people to the right work, because some people are more suited for a specific type of work. Some people are more technical. Some people thrive with strategic work. Other people strive with tactical work. Some people prefer, say, financial work. Other people prefer data science. So as a manager, you have to be able to know where the strengths and weaknesses of your people. I kind of liken management to conducting an orchestra. As a manager or as a conductor of an orchestra, you probably have 100 or 200 instruments within your orchestra. Do you need to know how to play all of them? Absolutely not. But what you need to know is the players, the instruments, the sounds that they produce, and when they need to produce them. So if you know the strength of your people and the tools that they could use and how well they could use them, you could conduct it very well and produce a fantastic symphony.
I actually think it's difficult to hire. Maybe you don't because you have established an eye for it, but I have seen many scenario, both inside and outside police departments, where just finding the right person, finding people, just as you mentioned, matching people to the work. And either everybody wants to do one thing and nobody wants to do the other thing, and just having that balance of having the right skill sets in the room to do a variety of things. But I think if it was easy, everybody would do it. And I think there's a lot of departments out there that struggle with it.
It is a real struggle. It is a real struggle. I was fortunate enough to have very talented people that I kind of personally had a say in recruiting and bringing on to my teams. And I created a great balance, and I was able to play on the strength of certain individuals and make sure that other individuals, while they are strong in some aspects, I still gave them work in other aspects to enhance their skills and become stronger in other aspects. But yeah, managing is quite difficult. I actually found managing within law enforcement to be the most difficult aspect of the work that I did. At times, I wished I would go back to being an analyst and just not to have to deal with people, because people are different. I mean, you look at your hand, it comes from the same body, but your fingers are completely different and have different functions, and people are different. People are completely different, and you have to be able to kind of change and adapt yourself as a manager to be able to deal with different people. Some people understand something very quickly. Other people, you have to actually kind of explain it to them, disassemble it, and then reassemble it. You have to do analysis on the stuff that you want to give them before them do an analysis on it. So yeah, it's challenging. At the end as well, good management and analysis is about also shielding your team from noise and fight for realistic expectation and insist on standards without crushing their curiosity, because that's how people learn, is by being curious and by experimenting. As a matter of fact, I actually recall Friday afternoons for us, on my teams at least, were just discussions about challenges they faced, problems they encountered, and how they solved them. But also, it was like almost a mentoring session. Okay, this is how I would do it. This is how I did it. We would have discussions on Friday afternoons, which were slow days. And I found that to be very useful use of our time.
No, it is interesting, and sometimes it's tough to do that, right? Because you get focused on the task at hand and the due dates and what's being produced. It can be difficult to break away to have those types of discussions, even though they are beneficial.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, we always also tried to make our clients, which are in general investigators, understand not to have higher expectations than they should. A lot of times I would push back on unrealistic timelines. I'd rather deliver fewer solid products than many weak ones.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can understand that. I'm curious, while we're on the topic, when you were recruiting, when you were going through the hiring process to add members to your team, how did you evaluate the classic education piece in terms of whether they had a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, or how much that had weight over maybe experience or over different skill sets that you might be looking for?
We created a rigorous process to put our candidates through. By the time they come to an interview, they would have had written examination, some sort of logic test, and as well as technical skill test, which oftentimes included software like Excel. In my case, I was always looking for individuals who have data skills. You don't have to be a data scientist, but you have to have some basic comfort with like Python or SQL, and you understand visualization tools like Power BI or Tableau. So if you came with those skills, then we could build on those skills and enhance them, at least when it comes to my team, because we dealt a lot with structured data. Because once you have these skills, you come prepared to deal with different data sets with the triple Vs. Understanding digital ecosystems. Threats today live in communication platforms. Crime has shifted from the streets a lot more to online. So for me, recruiting individuals with technical skills was almost a given. See, if you could come with a master's degree, I consider myself to have a PhD in analysis, even though it's not on paper. Experience counts for a lot in the work that we do. Being confident as well in front of the clients that we service is necessary, is absolutely necessary. So it's a balance. It's a balance. Academic education is not everything, but also when you come from academia, you have to change in our environment. In academia, for example, if you write a thesis, you are trying to prove to the expert, i.e. your professor, that you're good enough. So you have to write very voluminous papers, big sentences, big paragraphs, how you arrived at the conclusion and you put the conclusion at the end. But in our world, you're the expert writing for non-experts. You are the one who needs to actually explain complicated concepts to others that might not be able to understand your explanation unless you make it simple. You keep it simple, the KISS principle, as well as giving them the bottom line up front. I often say to analysts, our clients, especially senior executives or senior police officers, are in a hurry to stop reading. So you want to give them the bottom line up front.
Yeah.
You want to spell it out to them and spoon feed it to them, because by the time they read your suggestions or recommendations or findings, they're done with your report. They don't care how you did it and what you did to arrive at these conclusions. What they care about is the conclusions themselves.
Yeah, I had to learn that the hard way. I think I grew up watching too much TV. I always like the big reveal at the end in my presentations, and that's, as you said, not good in the police environment.
Yes. And one aspect of being a good analyst is critical thinking. The unique value that a human analyst brings to the table in this automation age is the ability to ask the right questions, to challenge assumptions, and to say, yeah, this neat answer does not actually fit with what we know. Understanding and studying cognitive biases and structured analytic techniques is a good investment to create a good analyst.
You just got me thinking about something. I saw an article, and it was dealing with some parent that moved. I think it was either US to Denmark or Denmark to US, doesn't really matter. But the article basically said that they were surprised that basically in Denmark, that the culture there was to encourage to take risk. And in the US, risk wasn't necessarily encouraged, it was to be safe type of thing. And
Yeah,
I've
we're definitely
always,
risk averse in North America.
yeah, and I feel that how that relates in the analyst world is I feel that, and I'm even in this as well, so I'm not throwing stones in a glass house, but I think it teaches analysts to play it safe and only produce data and not go the extra step of making that last part of the intelligence
Yeah.
cycle, recommendations and solutions, that they're built to play it safe, because if they stick their neck out there, it might get chopped off type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not intelligence analysis. If you just look at, I mean, I could describe the work that we do in 3 short sentences. What do we have? What does it mean? And what to do about it? If you're only looking at what do we have, you're just a researcher, right? If you're looking at what do we have and what does it mean, you're doing analysis, but it's not complete. You're not creating intelligence, because in order for you to create intelligence, you have to look at what do we have, what does it mean, and what to do about it. Because those recommendations or suggestions have to fall organically as a result of your analysis. Because if you're finding that there's a problem and you don't find a solution to that problem, then you're not doing your job. I mean, analysis is about taking data, which means nothing on its own, giving it context, turning it into information so it starts to actually tell a story. And when you understand that story fully and you develop a little bit of insight about what's happening and knowledge about it and draw conclusions, then you're going to draft suggestions or recommendations. So some people don't like the word recommendation because it sounds binding, but I mean, I would say suggestions, because you don't have to take what the analyst is suggesting and do it. You can choose to do it or not to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think also back to your specialization piece in the beginning of this interview, that to focus on 1 or 2 things and become an expert in that, it's a lot easier to make recommendations and solutions.
Absolutely.
You have the knowledge, skills, and ability to be that expert. And I feel that, like, analysts are spread so thin, doing a variety of different things, having their hands in so many different cookie jars, that they don't have that specialization. Hence, they're not comfortable making that solution.
There's a lot of mission creep happening within analysis. A lot of analysts are doing investigative work. I believe in the golden rule. I believe analysts should do 80% analysis, 20% investigative work, and investigators should do 80% investigative work and 20% analysis. That overlap of 20% is necessary between the two, so that there is like that symbiotic relationship and they can understand what each other do. But for you to be pulled into examining, say, 2 terabytes of data or 5 terabytes of data of a computer that was extracted somewhere, or a smart device that was extracted, this is more discovery. This is not analysis. So that should still be done by the investigator. Unfortunately for us, we kind of blurred the line between physical evidence and digital evidence. Evidence is evidence, regardless of its status. Why is it still that investigators are the ones that bag and tag physical evidence and analysts have to deal with digital evidence? It should continue to be investigators, analysts. An analyst does not need to watch a video, say, of a beheading to understand the severity of it, but they need to know that it's there, right? So I think there's a lot of mission creep happening within analysis, which kind of makes the analyst less impactful and effective and spreads them very thin. They're doing functions simply because they're more technical that investigators should be doing, which creates also a problem, because now an organization does not see that they have a gap that they need to fill with the proper resources. We were hiring law enforcement for their brawn, not for their brain. And it is shifting from brawn to brain. And we should actually consider both when we're hiring police officers.
It does seem like there's analysts out there doing investigative work that the investigator just doesn't want to do.
Exactly,
Right? To your
exactly.
point.
Like examining the content of a phone, looking at the pictures. That is discovery. That's not analysis. The analyst should look at the end result of that work that the officer did, that the investigator did. I don't think analysts are paid or compensated, or they have the proper backup resources to allow them to go to develop PTSD, seeing something that's very gory, for example. And if that happens, then they don't have the proper programs to support them like officers do.
Yeah. You also had, it reminds me, you had a pretty, I don't know, some people might call it a hot take, but you had an interesting take yesterday during the prep call that it's intelligence producers, not intelligence analysts.
Well, I mean, a lot of people tend to say intelligence analyst because the focus is on the end product as opposed to the process. But if you think about it, we produce intelligence, right? But we analyze information to get to that level. We analyze data, give it context, turn it into information, take that information, visualize it, and examine it from different perspectives, develop that insight about it, and understand it very well so that we could draw conclusions. And the end result is intelligence. So in reality, we're analyzing information, but the name comes from the fact that we're producing intelligence. So we're intelligence analysts. I mean, I accept that, but in reality, we are information analysts. But that title has been taken by computer types. So we're left with the intelligence analyst, which is, to be honest with you, it's more exciting to be called intelligence analyst than data analyst or information analyst.
Yeah. It does, for whatever reason, that word intelligence analyst does have the mystique that those other two just doesn't have.
It does. And part of the mystique as well is, think about it, not too many people do what intelligence analysts do. It's not, there's like, instead of having millions of people involved in that, there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people doing it. I know in Canada, not too many people could actually call themselves intelligence analysts. It is a privilege to be part of that group.
All right. Well, hey, this has been great. Thank you for your time and perspective. I do want to get to words to the world, but I also want to give you an opportunity to plug your company and what you're currently doing in consulting and training.
Yeah, I mean, I offer a lot of services in consulting and training. My company is IntelCT, intlct.com. And it could be simple advice. It could be a training on structured data analysis or basic intelligence training, or even open source intelligence, or just how can we go about solving this conundrum in our investigation. So yeah, it's an exciting kind of period of my career where I could just take the experience that I gained over the 24 years and I could put it to good use to continue to contribute to that great community that is law enforcement, more specific, the intelligence component of law enforcement analysis.
Yep. And we'll put the link to your website in the show notes along with the link to your LinkedIn account. Is there another way that people can contact you should they want to get in contact with you?
Well, they could contact me through the website. There's an email that comes to me my way directly, or robert@intelct.com.
Excellent. All right. Well, our last segment to the show is Words to the World, and this is where you can promote any idea that you wish. Robert, what are your words to the world?
If I leave the listeners with one idea, it's this. In intelligence analysis and analysis, it's easy to see everything as data, links, and case and numbers. But really behind each and every one of those, there are people, real people, who will feel the impact of the decisions that you support and the analysis that you undertake. Stay curious, stay humble, and stay human. Use your skills to make things a little safer and a little fairer for people who will never know your name. I've been fortunate to receive maybe medals and commendations, but the one reward that I appreciate the most One day, coming out of the courtroom after giving very solid testimony, that was the cherry on top in a case against a criminal who had murdered this young lady. Her family met me outside and thanked me for helping them get closure. The work that we do makes a difference for someone we will probably never meet. That, for me, is what public service is about.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you. You've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do
Yes.
appreciate you being on the show, Robert. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.